But now what happens if you're in an exam and they tell you to evaluate an expression? It says the process of finding the numerical value of an expression or an equation. So literally, this is how when you're talking, or when they tell you to evaluate something, they're looking for one answer. So one of the challenges was, when you're dealing with simplifying, sometimes it's hard to know if my answer should be multiple things or if it should just be a number. You're not sure. When it comes to evaluating, yes, we're looking for an actual number. Now, this number does not have to be a whole number. It can be a fraction. It can be a decimal, any of those things. But we're looking for an actual number when we say to evaluate something. And in other words, it means to calculate the value of. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, there are two types of problems that I came across when I was looking through the past papers when it comes to evaluating. Some of the questions look like the first one, type 1, where you have 45 divided by, and you have 8 minus 3 in parentheses plus 6. So in this case, you would be dealing, notice that you have multiple operations here. So to answer this question, you would be dealing with order of operations. In math, there is a preferred order. Now, why is there a preferred order? One of the reasons there's a preferred order is because if you just decide to do any or start with any of the operations first because you just like addition first or because you just like division first, you're gonna get different answers every time. And so across the board in math, they just come up with a preferred order in which we tackle our operations, so that at the end of the day, whether you're here or you're in China or you're in any part of the world, you'll still get the same answer. All right. So order of operations is what you will do to a question that looks like this, where it's just a bunch of operations and there's like just just different terms in there. Now, and there is a video on order of operations that's separate from our time together. And then the second type is where they tell you, okay, I'm going to give you, or I'm telling you that F is equal to 6 and G is equal to 2 and K is equal to 12. And then they say, calculate the value of these things, A, B, and they give you some stuff there. So we're going to focus on the type number 2, all right, during our time. We're going to focus on this and not the first one. And once again, you want to check out that video on order of operations, or PEMDAS. And that will help you to answer questions like type 1. So let's get into that. Okay, so we're going to start with that actual question. They would say, okay, evaluate this or something like that. So it says, given that F is equal to 6, G is equal to 2, and K is equal to 12, calculate the value of, and we have two parts to this question. Now, let me explain what they're saying to you. Now, remember, at all of these letters, F, G, and K, these are variables. One of the definitions that I mentioned about a variable is that variables are numbers, but are letters, but they represent numbers. They can change. In other words, we can decide that F can be in any number. And what we're expecting you to do is, okay, if I plug in or if I substitute F for the number you're given, what value do I get back? So let's look at part A for a second. All right, so part A says KG. Now, some students, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, K is 12 and G is 2. So, well, the answer must be 122. But you would not be correct, and I'm going to tell you why. What you have to notice is that the operation that's happening between two variables that are sitting next to each other, if they're just sitting there, the assumed operation is multiplication. So you're multiplying. So really what's happening is you have K multiplied by G. All right. So the answer is not 122, but instead I can rewrite this just so you can see it. It's going to be the same as K multiplied by G. All right. Now you can take that in for a second and we're going to keep going. So what is K? Well, in our question, it tells us that K is 12 and G is 2. All right. So K is 12 and G is 2. So now I can actually do the math. And this is where I mentioned before, when it comes to evaluating, they want you to find the value of this answer. All right. So, 12 times 2 is 24. All right. So there you go. Now let's take a look at the part B. All right. So part B says F plus G, I'm going to just write it out. F plus G is equal, divided by K. Let's tackle it. So F in our question is 6, and it's being added to G, which is 2, and that answer is being divided by K, which is 12. All right, so now let's go ahead and do the math. Now notice, if you just look at the whole thing, I have something in my numerator and something in the denominator. So I'm just going to take a moment. I'm going to simplify what's in my numerator first, and then take a look at the whole thing as a fraction. So we know that 6 plus 2 is 8. So 8, and that's going to be over 12. Now, for the most part, whenever you have a fraction, you want to check to see, can I simplify or can I reduce this fraction? Okay, are there any common factors in between the numerator and the denominator? And when I say factor, I want you to think about a number that can go into both the number 8 and the number 12 without any remainders. So a common number or a common factor between 8 and 12 is the number 4. So I'm going to divide the numerator by 4 and the denominator by the same number. Some students tend to divide the numerator and denominator by a different number, but you don't want to do that when you're reducing a fraction. Okay, you want to use the same number. So 8 divided by 4 is going to be 2, and then 12 divided by 4 is 3. So my answer in this case is 2 over 3. So notice that when I'm evaluating an expression, I have a number, I have an actual answer that's given back. Now, I have not seen where you get something else, like some random stuff that are not numbers back as yet. And so if I do see that in the future, I'll come back and say, I'm sorry guys, I was wrong. But for the most part, this is all I've seen in terms of evaluating. They're looking for you to give, and this is just based on the definition of evaluating. They're looking for you to give back an actual value as your answer. All right, so I hope that clarifies something for somebody. And let's take a look at another example just like it. Yeah, so when A is equal to 6, once again, B is equal to -2, and C is equal to 0, calculate the value of, and they give you some kind of expression that they want you to calculate. Now remember, we're looking at what operations are happening. What you're not going to do, I'm going to put a big NOT right here. Do not do. Don't take the numbers, let's say AC, and say, okay, that's a 6 and C is 0, and that becomes 60. This is wrong. This is incorrect. All right. We're going to look at the operation. We have A sitting next to a C. The operation between two variables or a coefficient and a variable is always multiplication unless it's written as something else. So for example, if they had A divided by C, then obviously by C, so I put a 6, that's obviously division. If they have A minus C, that's obviously subtraction. If they have A plus C, that's obviously addition. So, but if they just have A and C sitting there, the assumed operation is the only one that's left, which is multiplication. All right. So I hope that clarifies something for you all. So I'm going to rewrite. Let me take this off the screen for someone says, Ms. Nelson said XYZ, and I did not. Okay. So I'm going to write it with the operation in between it. So it's A times C. All right. And that's subtracting 4 multiplied or times B. All right. So what is A? A is 6. So that's 6 multiplied by what is our C? Well, C is 0. And we're subtracting that answer from 4, or we're subtracting from that answer 4 times B, which is a -2. All right. So let's take a look at that. So 6 times 0 right here, that's going to give us a 0. And then we're subtracting from that 4 times a -2. So we have a negative times notice it's a negative in front of the 4. So if you want, you can say -4 times -2. You'll get the same answer. So let me just do it that way. -4 times a -2, that's going to give us a +8. All right, so 0 plus 8. And so our answer is just simply going to be an 8. Okay. All right, guys, let's keep on going. All right, so this is how you would tackle a problem. If they say calculate, they'll tell you, like I said, they'll tell you what A, B, and C are. They'll tell you what the variables are, and all you're going to do is substitute them. But you have to pay attention to the operations. Keep in mind, if you have 2 letters, which are considered variables, or if you have something like a 2 sitting next to a variable, the operation happening there is multiplication. And so you Just want to keep that in mind, all right?